Welcome to our monthly career development series of events. This month, we are very, very happy to have three very successful data scientists, computational biologists, ML engineers, machine learning or AI engineers on our panel session. Our panel session today, just for anyone who, oops, let me go backwards. How do I go backwards? Oh, there you go. Yeah. Our panel session is titled The Top 3 Sectors in Hiring AI ML Scientists or Engineers Within the Life Sciences. And so the three panelists represent three different sectors the three different sectors in that. So welcome again. For those of you who are new to Scismic, Scismic is a company that does two primary things. We run skills-based job matching technology, which means we work directly with hiring managers and recruitment departments within life sciences companies specifically. So this is ag tech, chem tech, med tech, health tech, biotech, pharma, and we help them identify candidates with specific skill sets for their jobs. On the rest of what we do is to make sure we're using that information, we're identifying trends in hiring, how do we get job seekers within the life sciences marketable? We're putting out career development resources. We have a team that also works on helping you with your resume and helping you with your job interviews, any kind of questions you have in this space. So our mission is kind of matching the right people to the right roles to help propel innovation. But really the focus of today is kind of understanding and gaining insights from our three esteemed panelists. So we have Rohit Arora, who joins us as he's currently the senior application scientist at Ictos. We have Bridget Toomey. Is that how I say your last name, Bridget?
Yep, that's right.
Great. Who's the lead machine learning engineer at Piction. And we have Zander, who is the data scientist, machine learning specialist, who kind of works in various different sectors. And we're very happy and very grateful for them to be here today. So I'm going to introduce each of them very, very briefly, but kind of get them to tell us a little bit about themselves. And again, just a quick reminder for anyone who has a question, just raise your hand. Jenny will create a queue and we can kind of jump to your questions. So we make sure your curiosities and your questions get answered throughout the session. If you're shy, feel free to also put that question in the chat and we can kind of address that as we go along. All right, so we're going to begin. We're going to start with Rohit. I had a good opportunity to catch up with Rohit and learn a little bit about him. So Rohit is now the senior application scientist at Ictos. He started with a master's in molecular and nano biophotonics, and then went on to do a PhD in computational bio, did a couple of postdocs both in Europe, and then came to Boston to do a research scholarship, which I guess is like a senior research scientist or senior postdoc type position at Harvard and Beth Israel. And he kind of developed skills that kind of led him into this career path today. And today he takes on a customer-facing role at Ictos, which is a startup that develops AI and software for ligand and structure-based drug design. And Rohit, I'm going to hand it to you to tell us a little bit about that career progression. Yeah, tell us about yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you, Janika, and thank you for having me as a panelist. I really appreciate it. So as introduced, I'm Rohit, application scientist, senior application scientist at Ictos. I lead the application science group at Ictos. And my career has been, I've made a few changes in my career over the years based on the technology which I have been wanting to associate myself with. They make my gain skills that are in demand or of interest to me. So I started off I did my bachelor's in chemistry, and then I moved that was in India, and then I moved to Europe to do a master's. The master's was more generally in biotech, but I decided to specialize in computational chemistry. That led to a master's thesis and a PhD in the same lab in France, in which I focused on computer-aided drug design. That was my main focus, but that still involved not a lot of AI, machine learning, or coding of any sort. It was still more application-based role. Once I did that, I did a short postdoc in collaboration with Johnson & Johnson, which was fantastic. It really put me in touch with farm industry and really made me understand sort of bit of ins and outs of it. Still at a very naive level, but it was very useful. So that sort of gave me a window into what is in demand and AI and machine learning were really picking up in the drug discovery sector. And if you did have those skills, and down the line you would be, as a computational person, you would be, you may have a little bit of a hard time. You don't have to be an expert in it, but you need to know about them. So with that in mind, I decided to do another postdoc, this time at Harvard, at a lab which was developing AI and machine learning algorithms for studying biological systems, primarily in immunology. We were trying to do pattern recognition, antibody repertoires, TCR repertoires. Excellent project, fantastic project. Gave me very good exposure, very good. I learned a lot of things. I learned to code. I learned to develop algorithms in AI and machine learning. And just like when the pandemic hit, I had to make some life decisions, make some changes, and decided to join Ictos, which they had a great opportunity for a more business side, customer facing role in an AI machine learning company working in the drug discovery sector. Again, dealing with a lot of pharma, and I decided to take that, and it has been wonderful to work in this position. And as I said, this time I decided to move a little more to the business side of the things, because again, it's important to keep updating your skill set, trying to try new things, and see what you like. You can always go, if you're a researcher, you can always go back to doing research, and if you don't like it. So that's where I'm at right now. And yeah, happy to answer any questions, and I hope I'll be of help.
Next, we will go to Bridget. We welcome Bridget, who currently is the lead machine learning engineer at Piction. Bridget comes from a very strong kind of mathematical background, and started off helping to build predictive tools for business users, and then kind of now has moved on to lead the efforts at Piction, where she develops imaging tools and models for patients with skin condition. So over to you, Bridget. Tell us a little bit about that journey and kind of very overarching viewpoint of what Piction does right now.
For sure. Yeah. Thank you, Danica. So yeah, as Danica mentioned, I studied math in undergrad, and I also earned a master's degree in math. But I have been interested in the biomedical sciences as well. I actually started off wanting to be pre-med in undergrad, and then found that I enjoyed my math courses more, but still maintained an interest in the life sciences. So as I wrapped up my master's and I was trying to decide what I wanted to do, I actually did an internship in Berlin where my team and we were working with a professor whose goal was to develop a non-invasive blood test for lung cancer. So we were using genomic and proteomic data to classify patients as having either lung cancer or being healthy patients. And I thought it was a really cool project, and I learned a lot more about machine learning through it and wanted to stay in the field. So as Danica sort of alluded to, my first job was at a company called Ultrix, and they make business analytics software. So not so much in the life sciences domain, but it was more squarely like a machine learning oriented job. And then I worked in a couple other roles, one in the cybersecurity sector, and the one after that was more in the home insurance space, using computer vision to estimate roof damage to people's homes after hurricanes. But now I've been at Piction for about 3 years. And so as Danica sort of alluded to, we are a virtual first dermatology company. So we actually did make a little bit of a pivot late last year. When I first joined Piction, we were making a smartphone app to help primary care physicians diagnose skin conditions. So that smartphone app, of course, extensively used machine learning and computer vision to help them make those diagnoses. And I built most of our models that we were using. But we did decide to make a strategic pivot late last year to becoming a virtual first dermatology clinic. So now we provide care to the patients directly. We have dermatologists on our staff, and we are using machine learning now to help us scale more effectively and help route patients to the right kind of provider and help assist the providers to make their diagnoses more quickly. A lot of this stuff is now kind of like a work in progress, since the pivot was somewhat significant, but like we are working on incorporating machine learning into the new product to make our providers more effective.
Great, thank you, Bridget. Again, I have a couple more follow-up questions, but I'm going to wait till the introductions are ready and kick off the Q&A in a bit. Next, we have Zander. Now, Zander started off with a Bachelor of Science in Physics at Stanford, and then a Master's of Fine Arts in Acting, which I'm guessing you'll tell us a little bit more about in terms of how it all comes together. But then Zander went through, started off in fintech and kind of developed models for automated trading strategies, then moved into quantum insights, where he worked on projects within the biomedical research space for both corporate and academic institutions. So I'm curious about kind of your insights into where things are going in that space, and what type of projects, very big picture, come to you. What type of projects come to you to say, hey, we're looking for a machine learning component, or where that industry is essentially going. So tell us a little bit about that track.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for the intro. So yes, I'm Zander, and road has been windy, my professional road. So yes, as you said, I started with an undergraduate degree in physics. I'm not going to say too much about my whole other life in theater. It was just a very different part of my life, and then I came back to the quantitative numeric conceptual world, which I've been in now for about 20 years. That's more where I'm more at home. Theater was more a way of sort of building out the other side of my personality, so to speak. But it's less relevant here, I think.
Okay.
The first 15 of those 20 years back in the numerical scientific world were in finance. And then the last about 5 years in the life sciences. And all of my training and experience as a software engineer, as a data scientist, and as a machine learning specialist has all been on the job. And also it's worth mentioning that really exclusively my professional experience has been in essentially startup companies, or smaller, which, gives me there are a couple of thoughts that I had coming in that I want to share with everyone, and we'll see which of them are threads that we collectively want to follow. One of them is that startup versus not a sort of trade-off. There are a couple of things to be thinking about if you're looking for a job in the whole AI, ML, data science world. And my perspective, I've been in the life sciences for the last few years, but it's really more the data science and the machine learning that is really the draw and the focus for me. Biotech, at Quantum Insights, I was doing data science consulting for biomedical research teams, both academic and corporate, essentially. And it was way better than my time in finance, in the sense that it really does matter to me being part of something that's trying to make the world a better place. Finance sometimes is doing that, but not nearly as obviously as, developing drugs and trying to cure cancer and all that. So that was a step forward for me. But the dimensions I want to lay out that I've been thinking about, because I'm also in the job market right now. So for all of you here who are in the job market, I feel you, I'm with you. It's an interesting time and an interesting job market these days. So one of those dimensions is the startup versus other. It's in some ways definitely easier to get in the door if you have less experience at a startup company, but there are trade-offs. Obviously, there's less job security. There's more fluidity, of roles, which for some people is a plus and some people is a minus. So am I looking at startups or at larger companies? That's one dimension that we could discuss. Another important one is what I call the generalist versus specialist dimension. And I've kind of done both. I was in the hedge fund Cerebellum Capital, where I worked, more of a specialist. We were a meta quant fund. We were trying to build a system that would automate the process of coming up with and validating algorithmic trading strategies. And so we were, fairly deep into meta learning and reinforcement learning and the ins and outs of working with time series data. So that was more of a sort of specialist kind of thing. At Quantum Insights, in some ways, I was more of a generalist, because we were working with a number of different teams at different cities, at different companies, and trying to help them make sense of their data and find patterns in their data that were of interest to them and were hopefully valuable to them. And that was less about doing deep dives into the sort of, the deep end of the pool, the cutting edge, bleeding edge of AI and machine learning, and more about bringing to bear the sort of standard toolbox of machine learning, and data science and statistics for people who had their heads, mostly in the biology and are plenty smart enough to understand a lot of stuff over on the data science machine learning side, but just don't have the bandwidth to be thinking about that while they're trying to think about how cancer works and how to make it stop. So the generalist specialist is another interesting part of this conversation that we might want to have. And the last thing that I want to introduce just briefly is what I think of as the data science communication gap. And that is that once upon a time, if you were a scientist and you had data, you would do your own data science, right? That's how it used to work. And then, a couple of decades ago, we collectively had this great idea that we could specialize further and have people who are data scientists. And that had a lot to do with the rise of machine learning. And this has overall been a good thing. And it has created a new challenge, the communication gap, which I got to wrestle with extensively at Quantum Insights as a data science consultant to biologists and biochemists, because they understand the biology. I understand all of these cutting edge tools for finding and understanding patterns in data, but they don't really speak my language, and I definitely don't fluently speak their language. I would not call myself a biologist. I learned a lot about biology in the last several years, but I'm not a biologist. And so that new challenge is the communication gap. And it's more on the generalist front than the specialist front, depending on which of those roles you find more interesting. If you're a generalist, you're likely to find that bridging that communication gap becomes an important part of your job description. So that's another dimension along which we could pursue this conversation.
Zander, I'm curious there to hear from Bridget and Rohit, because Bridget was interested. You said you were interested in the biomedical side pretty early on, so you started to incorporate a lot of that. Your projects that you gravitated towards had that component, the element with it, right?
Sorry.
No. Basically, was it as difficult for you? Do you think that really put you at an advantage over someone that completely didn't have that experience in terms of language and communication?
I think it definitely helped with that internship that I mentioned, just understanding certain concepts and like how does methylation work, for instance. That was like an important topic we were discussing during that internship. So I think it definitely helped me on that side of things. And I think it has helped me in my present job too, understanding a little bit better about like what the underlying biological processes are that cause different types of skin diseases. It's sort of, I think, has made me a better person to train models to do this sort of classification, just because like I have a better idea of what actually is going on the biology side of things, and it's not just like these scary names of diseases that I have no idea how they fit together or anything.
Right. So when you look to kind of fill people in the team, is that a plus? Is that not entirely necessary? Like, how important is that component to how you look to kind of hire or identify?
So in terms of hiring, I would say it's definitely not necessary. It would be a plus if there was someone with like a stronger biomedical background, but it wouldn't be strictly necessary. I think we would the more important priorities would be their machine learning skills and their general programming skills, and to an extent maybe their math skills. Although one thing they would need to have is comfort with looking at like sometimes fairly graphic images, to be frank. Right. It's perhaps not a job for someone who's like very squeamish about looking at photos of skin issues.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Rohit, you almost came at this from a different angle, right? You came at this with you were more strongly integrated within that kind of biological aspect. And then tell us a little bit about your challenge or not challenge, your experience with that.
So having experience in the field helps, and I think it comes down to what the focus is. For instance, the company I currently work for, a lot of focus on doing the right chemistry, even if we apply AI and machine learning to chemistry problems, to drug development problems. The focus is making sure that the end user, because we develop software, so they're end users who are medicinal chemists, is it working for them or not? So the focus is very strongly on the chemistry side of things. So AI, the algorithms, or the method development is sort of we make sure when we do the method development that a chemist is able to use it. So sometimes we have to change for instance the for the neural net architecture if the existing one does not cater to the needs of a medicinal chemist. So that's sort of a primary focus. It really depends on where you're working, what your focus is. We have come across, for instance, in the same vein, when I interview. And I have interviewed a few people for some positions in my team. The focus has been always been on, okay, you understand a little bit about machine learning and AI, good, but mostly your focus has been in the last 10 years has been medicinal chemistry or computational chemistry. That's okay, that's good for me, because what you need to, you won't be working in you know, as I think Zander was talking about, generalist versus specialist. Currently, I'm in a more generalist role. So if you come join my team, you'll be more of a generalist. So I'll fill you in. Don't worry about that, about all the machine learning aspects of it, because I have experience in it. I can fill you in. But medicinal chemistry is what you bring to the table. So it really, again, as I said, it depends on what the focus is on. We have come across companies, rather. It's a little anecdote I like to tell sometimes is because once you were talking to a company and they sounded very skeptical of using AI and machine learning in their drug discovery pipeline, and it was very obvious they were skeptical. And I asked him, like, why are you skeptical? And he said that, to be honest, we have talked to a few startups, and you know, most of the times people don't know what they're doing. So the example he gave, that they talked to somebody, there were two software engineers who jumped into drug discovery not knowing anything about chemistry. And that really hurt them, because the people who actually do chemistry, who actually do drug development, small biotechs, mid-sized biotechs, big pharma, they know exactly what they're looking for. So they don't really care about the AI machine learning aspect of it. Right. So these two software engineers jumping into drug discovery space without any experience in chemistry or biology, it hurts them. So you have to have that, so some level of expertise. If you don't have that, just you have to hire somebody who does. Right.
So a bit of context in that.
Context is very important, especially because there is a lot of, you know, I think AI and machine learning is just thrown around a lot these days. Yeah. And it's important to make sure that, you know, people who are actually deploying these algorithms, they know what they're talking about. So I think, yeah, from a hiring perspective, that's a key thing.
Okay, understood. And I know, Zander, you brought up this theme of building tools versus using tools.
Yes. Although, actually, there was one other thing that I wanted to mention, which it may sound too obvious. So I'll try and say it briefly. And if it is obvious to you, you know, all of you listening, if it is obvious, great. If it's not, I think it'll be the most important thing you hear anybody say today. And that is this: learning and growth and change is an indefinitely ongoing process. And if you incorporate that as part of what you do, not part of what you do temporarily until you're done, right? You're always going to be learning and developing new skills and learning to use new tools. And this has always been true, certainly in my mind, but it's particularly true nowadays because in the AI, ML, and related data science space, right now, particularly with the whole generative AI sort of revolution that is underway, things are changing so fast. I was in a conversation last week with someone who is getting a startup company off the ground, and they are building in a core tool that they're going to, you know, base a lot of their technology on, that was published and put out into the world 2 weeks ago, the week before we had the conversation. So, if you're thinking, yeah, obvious, fine, great, then good. If that's at all an issue for you, that's more important than anything else. Sort of find your way to the mindset where you're always going to be learning and getting to know new tools and learning more about whatever domain you're in, be it life sciences or whatever else. so that I think that's actually a really important issue. Now, back briefly, Danica, to how did you phrase the question again? Because it kind of matters. There are different versions of all these questions. You were talking about the building versus.
Yeah, there was no question. I was just bringing back to, I know you had something important you wanted to say about the trends of where in the past it was a lot of, it was people using tools and the familiarity of people with those tools. Now I feel, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, what I feel like you were kind of more alluding to the fact that the trend was more building your own tools for different use cases.
I'm not so sure about that, actually. I think there's a lot of both. And so rather than a trend, I would suggest whichever sounds more appealing, because I also believe that it's really important in deciding what you want to do. Start with what lights you up, what gets a fire going inside of you that you just intrinsically, I want to work on this project and I want to see this project come to fruition and succeed. And then, sort of success and money and promotions and all of that to some extent will come from that. And I just think of that as by far the best way to sort of go about deciding what you want to do. And so, because I think there's a lot of tool building and a lot of tool using that's going on. And it partly depends where you want your focus to be. And what I mean by that is, if you're a generalist in the life sciences, I think you're at least somewhat more likely to wind up in a company where the life sciences are kind of leading. In other words, let's take as an example, like a big pharma company. They are in the process, some of them are, have gotten farther than others on this front, of sort of bringing in data scientists, hiring data scientists, incorporating data science and machine learning into what they do. But they're big companies. Big companies sometimes pivot only quite slowly. And most importantly, just they have a clear focus, which is, drug development in that example. And so if you, as a computational biologist or as a data scientist or machine learning specialist, wind up at one of those companies, you're more likely to be hired as a generalist because you're going to be a resource for the life scientists, which means that it's the data science sort of in service of the life sciences is leading, as opposed to the tool building. And so I'll take as an example there are quite a number of companies who are doing things like trying to build an AI-driven platform for example, simulating the behavior of small molecules in order to enable and enhance the process of drug discovery. Mm-hmm. So at that company, depending on the company, it's certainly much more likely than at one of the big pharma companies that it's really going to feel like data science and AI and machine learning are sort of out in front, like that's what you're doing. And obviously, the understanding of the biology and the biochemistry will be critically important, but it's a sort of a different focus.
Yeah.
And so both of do you like the idea of it being more focused on the AI/ML, or do you like the idea of being more focused on the life sciences, is actually sort of connected to a very similar question. Do you like the idea of, walking around the building with your machine learning toolbox and helping people out? Or do you like the idea of being in the deep end of the pool, sort of building new tools for the machine learning toolbox? Right. And again, the question is which one of those things makes you go, ooh, yeah, that one, that's what I want to do. That's to me is the key deciding factor.
So for and this is open to kind of any of you, but for a computational biologist or a bioinformatician in the grad school kind of postdoc phase, if the primary focus there has been the use case, right, the context, the science, the research aspect of it, as opposed to the AI aspect of it itself, what are some of the top, what are the top three things or skills that you would highlight that are like generalist based skills that you could bring to the forefront to open up more opportunities for you within the job market and industry? And things like, what are the most popular or which tools are most expected that people know how to use within each of your spaces? Are they kind of common? Like you should know these three platforms. These are given. These are the up and coming public. What should they have on their CV that could open up doors for them to more opportunities? So the more generalist skills, what do they highlight?
There's a fair amount I could say about that. I don't know if either of our other panelists want to jump in there with thoughts on that.
Why don't you start?
I'll try and keep it brief. I have two short answers to that. Number one, there's quite a trend to AI is doing really extraordinary things, which is absolutely true. In the rush to be excited about that and sort of jump on that bandwagon, I sometimes feel like it somewhat gets lost how much opportunity there still is for the human, natural intelligence to inform what scientists are learning from their data. And I'm going to start with a really, really simple example, or just a basic idea, which is before you go to the sophisticated, elaborate machine learning algorithms to get whatever it is that you think you want out of your data, don't skip the step where you actually just look at your data in really simple ways. Look at the distributions overall, look at the distributions in each data dimension, look at whether there are extreme outliers, just the basics, because sometimes you'll find problems that need to be fixed before you go to whatever, cutting edge machine learning algorithm. So, and there are ways in which there's lots of room still for human creativity in how to ask questions and how to, even using the really basic tools, how to try and answer those questions with the data that you're looking at. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, when it comes to machine learning, the following taxonomy is a little weird, but I think it'll be good enough for our purposes here. The standard toolbox is mostly regression, clustering, and classification, right? And there are quite a number of somewhat conventional, well-known algorithms in all three of those categories. And if you've used an open source package like scikit-learn is one of the standard ones, and if you haven't, you might want to look at it. You will find many different regression algorithms, many different clustering algorithms, many different classification algorithms.
Okay.
So that's kind of what I think of as
right.
Really the standard machine learning toolbox. The deep end of the pool is, and this breakdown is not perfect, but involves more often two things in particular that show up much less in the standard toolbox. And those things are deep learning, neural networks, and reinforcement learning. So if you're interested in, making your way into the deeper end of the AI ML pool and building the cutting edge tools rather than using the existing ones, then two really good places to start building your knowledge and your expertise are reinforcement learning and deep learning.
Okay, thank you. I might jump to Bridget and then Rohit and kind of ask the similar thing, because I think it's important for people to, oftentimes when we come out of academic research or research in our grads, master's, grad student phase and postdocs, we're really more we've been so focused on the project itself and the context that we don't realize we have all these generalist skill sets that should come out in our CV, because it really does open up doors in terms of opportunities. And I'm curious to hear from both of you as well, what some of those things might be that people can think of to highlight out, pull out of their skill set.
Sure. Yeah. So I might not know as much about the typical PhD in bioinformatics skill set, because I haven't worked with a ton of those people. But I think one thing that maybe a lot of those people have that would be useful to see on a CV if they're trying to move into a more of a machine learning role would be strong programming skills. So for instance, I've worked with a few physicists or people who had PhDs in physics, especially computational physics, and then transitioned into machine learning and data science. And they did so much computational work during their PhDs that they had really strong programming chops, and that translated well to the machine learning universe. So yeah, if you're a bioinformaticist with a similar skill set, definitely highlight that on your resume.
Sure. And then any tools that you would kind of expect as basic that Zander hasn't mentioned, or anything you want to add, or anything you might not agree with, even in your sector?
I think his taxonomy works pretty well for tabular data. I think for computer vision, it gets a little bit more specialized. So if you're like trying to transition more into being like a computer vision expert, I think it makes sense to focus also on learning things like object detection and semantic segmentation, and understanding how convolutional neural networks work, and then also understanding how transformers have been used for computer vision more recently.
Okay, gotcha. And Rohit, anything to add to that?
Yeah, just a couple of things. So I agreed exactly with the Zander and Bridget. I think sort of the data kind of data I use falls in one category of tabular data. So what Zander talked about, regression, clustering, key, lot of different ways to look at it, a lot of different algorithms to approach them. So I think you don't have to be expert in all of them, just have some sense of how basically they work, and that should be good to go. One key thing, and I think this was mentioned earlier in the conversation, it's really important to just not think of any AI algorithm as magic. And this is something people, let's say you're working for an AI company and a client who doesn't have an AI background, believe me, they assume that you can do magic. You can't, right? So it's really important to convey that to people, like, hey, and be humble about it. Like, you're fantastic at coding. You've done some fantastic, developed some fantastic algorithms. Great, but you have to be humble about it and not try to approach every problem as that AI has a solution for it. It's like becomes like a hammer and a nail issue. Try to look at the problem holistically. Sometimes, I mean, in my past life, when I was doing my postdoc at Harvard, I was new to this. As I said, I had learned to code and learned sort of develop my first machine learning algorithms at Harvard, at my lab. It was fantastic, but sometimes there were times when we could just ask a physicist for a solution because this problem has been solved by statistical physics. So we don't have to resolve it. So reinventing the wheel was not why do it? So they could tell us a solution and we could just deploy it, and it worked. Same with mathematicians. We could just talk to mathematicians. They would tell us, like, hey, this is a known problem. Don't worry about it. You just have to apply the solution, and it works. So look for the solutions outside of AI. Just because you are an expert in AI doesn't mean it will always work or it has to work. One thing I wanna mention is, like, maintain, if you are getting out of as a bioinformatician or a computational biology graduate, PhD student, master student, maintain your GitHub page. Make sure there's activity on it. I made that mistake of not doing it because, as I said, so what I did was all my contributions were on my lab page, my lab's GitHub page. So I never bothered maintaining my individual page, and that I still regret that. So that's something I think hopefully you can learn from, and make sure that there's activity on it. Just do stuff, do some cool stuff, do some, it's okay. Whatever you do, just make sure that it's active. Of course, it's not, it should have some meat on it also, but that's something really important, and you can, because nowadays you can just write your own entire CV in GitHub, and you can just send it to somebody, and that comes across. That's the best kind of sort of proof you can show somebody that what you're talking about. So those are kind of my tips and tricks. So
I have a question from an audience member. How do I look for roles that are more math physics inclined rather than solely programming ML application in drug discovery, for instance?
It's a good question. I'm not the best person to answer that question because my background is biology, but the people I worked with had a lot of math background and physics background. Mm-hmm. So you would, I think, a lot of the roles do involve Wall Street, I think, because that's a lot of people, a lot of quants do a lot of math. So that's one role. The other one is you can look at companies like MathWorks, for instance, the kind of work they do. They do a lot of math development. Their development requires a lot of mathematics and so on. So in my field, if you're in computational biology, you should look at more, for instance, or rather computational chemistry, excuse me. You should look at more companies like D. Shaw Research, who do a lot of force field development and free energy calculation development. So a lot of different opportunities. Okay. If you start looking at it, yeah.
Bridget, I feel like you're probably also poised to answer that one from the math perspective.
Sure. So I can't really speak to drug discovery so much, but I think this can be a little bit tricky to like operationalize at scale. But if you kind of go into roles looking for things that aren't necessarily like cut and dry, you can immediately apply tools out of the box. You might need to think about the problem mathematically and like create your own, say, unique mathematical model and then apply pre-existing tools. No, to be fair, yeah, sometimes you can't immediately discern that just by looking at a job posting. But if you start talking to the hiring manager and get some more specifics about their problems, you can kind of oftentimes discern that.
Okay. For a computational chemist with no academic or industry background in data science, what sources, websites, community do you suggest for performing some real world related projects to be considered precious projects, or I guess valuable for entering the pharma industry? So where can you get some hands-on experience essentially to make your first step?
I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, Bridget.
Oh, no, that's fine. So I was just going to say one thing, if you have pretty strong programming skills, Fast AI is a really good resource for learning more about machine learning and AI. They have 2 courses, one that's more like an introduction to machine learning and deep learning, and then a second step that is more about generative models. And they really, one nice thing about the program is that it's more like from the ground up. So they have you like start building stuff pretty quickly, and they gradually introduce more of the math behind the concept as it goes on. So they keep you pretty engaged with feeling like you're consistently building interesting stuff.
Okay. And then where do you guys, so if you can give me your top 2 sources, I know Zander mentioned like continuous growth and continuous learning in the space because it's kind of moving very fast. Top 2 sources for, learning and constantly keeping up to date with that. Or top 2 ways, it doesn't have to be sources, but essentially top 2 ways that, and any one of you who wants to jump on,
Actually, just earlier, just a few days ago, I had sort of circled back to update my own way of going about what you're talking about. But rather than saying like, here's the one site you should go to, because we live in an age where the information is all out there and, search engines are increasingly sophisticated as far as how they respond to your questions, I would say just sort of think about what you want and go and ask, you can do a web search for something like like good or best sources for data science news or best data science blogs. And you will, because I did this a few days ago, you will find like there's a Medium post, the top 20 data science blogs, and just look through the first 3 of those and find one that sounds like, oh, that might be what I'm looking for, because the one that is best for me might not even be the one that's best for me 3 years from now, let alone the one that's best for someone else here. It's an individual thing, and the information is all out there. So yeah, just go look for news aggregation sites, like AI news sites. Lord knows how many of those there are, many, right? AI blogs. Just try a couple out, sample, do a taste test here and there, and you'll probably pretty quickly find 1 or 2 or maybe 3 that feels like, okay, this might be a reliable source of stuff that I find interesting going forward.
Bridget and Rohit, what are your favorite ways of keeping on top of what's going on?
One thing I do is follow people like Jan LeCun on LinkedIn, and if those people have recently done interesting work, they'll typically post about it, and it'll typically rise to the top of my feed. So, for instance, that's how I found out about Meta's new segment anything framework. It's like a very flexible semantic segmentation model that allows you to segment essentially like arbitrary categories. So I mean, in my case, I tend to follow more like computer vision, deep learning type of people. But if you're specializing in a different area of machine learning, you can follow other leaders in your subspecialty.
Okay.
I have a bit of a different approach to this because, as I said, I learned on the job. So it was a little different for me because, as I think was alluded to earlier, the easiest way to learn is to try to solve a problem with the new tools. And that's really, I see that's easiest way to learn anything if you actually are using that tool to really resolve a problem. So you asked earlier about a computational chemist, how could they approach something like that if you don't have if you don't have a background in data science? This is what I would suggest: pick up a problem, try to solve it. It's easier to do it in a context of a lab or a internship or something, we don't shy away from asking for help from different, if you have access to a CompChem lab or a professor or anybody or any other grad students, feel free to ask them, work with them, just give it a shot. So that's a great way to learn. Other ways to learn is in the field of CompChem, I would recommend keep track of the blog by Patrick Walters. Pat Walters. He was chief data scientist at Relay Therapeutics. He's one of the legends in the field, so I would definitely recommend following him. When I was learning, as I said again, I was learning on the job, and I had a lot of questions because, again, if you don't learn it sort of in the classroom or professionally, there are terms you don't come across, and when you do, you don't know what they mean sometimes, and there are some basic stuff like, for example, I remember K-fold cross validation. I just didn't know how to, but what does that mean, K-fold? Like, why is it K? Why not N? Those kind of silly questions, right? So one thing I started doing many years ago is I set up Google alerts for the keywords I'm interested in. For instance, reinforcement learning. I was doing in 2015, 2016, I was doing generative AI, like ChatGPT. That's where I started. That was my first project. We were generating new body sequences. Just keep keywords in Google Alert. It sends you updates frequently, weekly, bi-weekly. I don't know. You can customize that. And a lot of what it sends you is garbage, but once in a while you see some interesting blogs, Medium posts, or even papers. So you can also set up these same alerts on Google Scholar. I get alerts every week, and it really helps me. Sometimes it's just like I ignore them, but a lot of times I see interesting content relevant to what I do. So those are my suggestions.
Okay.
Also, a lot of companies, I don't know about a lot, but definitely some of the big AI/ML companies will have their own blogs, and depending on what you're interested in, that can also obviously be interesting. DeepMind has a blog, OpenAI, Anthropic, and all of that is more in the deep end of tool building than using the standard toolbox, but they're regularly posting stuff. So
anything specific to diagnostics imaging, kind of specific to your line of work, so like drug discovery or by whatever academia comes to you for in that sense, in terms of research or anything kind of specific to that world that you think of that are your favorites? Any of you?
So as I said, for in the world of drug discovery, Patrick Walters' blog is very useful. A lot of people cite it actually in their papers and grants.
Oh wow!
So it comes in handy. Otherwise, if you are coming from academia, the best source is bioRxiv, ChemArchive. Track of papers there, because when you go to the websites, you can search by subjects. So I would keep track of papers there. It comes in very handy. The blogs, I think Zander made a great point about the blogs with these companies. So all of these companies, for instance, us, Ictos.com, Ictos.ai, excuse me, we have a blog we maintain, for example, how we developed a algorithm for generating new peptides relevant to disease and so on. So blogs are a great way of keeping in touch. And we also do YouTube videos. That's something you should also keep a track of. So one thing I started doing was also YouTube videos. In an iPhone, you're able to exit the app and still be able to listen to the video. So you can listen to stuff while working out or going for a walk. Same with podcasts. So outside of that, again, I haven't really, as I said, I learned on the job, so I didn't really look much outside. So those are my tips and tricks, especially in the drug discovery, computational chemistry / biology field. Those are useful resources.
Gotcha. Okay. So we have 2 more questions, and then we will end the session right on the hour, so to make sure we're respectful of the panelist time. But the first one, I think, for Zander, what are your tips for anyone who's looking for an entry-level role in AI/ML in healthcare? Granted, they have a lot of experience in developing computer vision LLMs, but have little experience in the healthcare domain itself. Or Bridget, whoever.
So I want to briefly say, and my answer to that is also going to lead toward 2 other questions that I'm seeing in the chat about this sort of personal, social, emotional irritation issues of the difficulties of looking for a job. And that is that, so I've had a number of people in my network in the last month or so say at least 3 people totally independently said to me, Zander, you don't get a job by sending your resume in response to a job listing. That's not how you get a job. You get a job by talking to the people that you and asking for other people from them that you can talk to, use your network and work to expand your network. Now, for those of us who are introverts, I'm sort of an ambivert myself. Sometimes I'm an introvert, sometimes more of an extrovert. This can be really challenging, but I think there is a large kernel of truth there that Mead and Gabriel were talking about. It's a very different experience sort of getting in the door if it's through someone that you, than if you just sent your resume in response to the job listing. That's absolutely a fact of life, and it's as true in AI ML data science as in any other industry.
I know from our conversation, Rohit would probably agree with you on that quite a bit in terms of the networking aspect.
But I mean, I was just, agreeing with Zander while he was talking. I got my last 2 jobs based on networking. The current job I have is somebody I knew back in 2014. I kept in touch, and prior to that, my last postdoc, which is sort of the highlight of my career, which I really enjoyed the project I was working on, I got it because I just happened to talk to somebody at a party. It was a party full of scientists, but still a party. But networking is really the key, and I really understand it's not easy for everyone. Everybody's different, and for introverts it's difficult. But there are channels. You don't have to go out. Thankfully, LinkedIn and other platforms have made it easier to be able to talk to people without actually interacting with them physically, face to face. So you should always continue doing that. It really, nobody will hold it against you that you ask them a question about introducing them to somebody else. So definitely do that. Networking is key, and if you're able to, or if you are willing to, go out to these meetup groups, go out to look for in universities. If you're grad students in universities, there are mixers, meetups. Look on meetup.com. There are in your area. There are almost certainly, especially while I'm talking in the Boston area, Boston, North Carolina, California, Texas, these places, New York, these places have a lot of events every weekend for different kinds of professionals, healthcare professionals, pharma professionals, entrepreneurs, stuff like that. So go to these meetups. Chances are you probably won't meet anybody interesting, but for the first 6-7 times, but the 8th time you probably meet one person who might be the key. So keep your options open. Keep your make sure that you don't close off that option.
Yeah, I want to add one other thing to that list. I'm actually going to put a link into the chat here. There's an organization that I found very recently through someone who told me about it. It's called Bits in Bio. There's a Slack channel with several thousand people on it. They have in-person events, I don't know how regularly, in several different major cities all over America, maybe even outside of America, I'm not sure. Anyway, it's yet another sort of networking opportunity and place to hear about things that are going on. Yeah.
Second, Bits and Bio, it's very useful. Yeah, I've been to the events.
Okay. Bridget, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Sure. I mean, so I would definitely agree that networking is helpful and your rate of success will be higher if you go through people in your network. But I don't want people to freak out, like if they have, say, just moved to a new city and they just graduated, which was my position. I was in a new city after I finished grad school and trying to figure out what I was going to do for my first job. So I was actually able to find my first 2 roles just via online job postings. I think one thing that can be helpful too is to sort of targeting your search to smaller companies if this is your first job out of school, because oftentimes at bigger companies, your resume will just get sent to a filter. And I think in some cases, no one even looks at it. But for example, for my second role, I had success, I think in part because the company was so small, they had a listing on the built-in Colorado job board. I think they have job boards, similar built-in job boards in other cities. But I remember they just said to email the hiring team, and I sent them my resume via email, and things sort of went from there. So I think if you don't have much of an in-person network yet, one thing I would suggest is maybe targeting your search more towards smaller companies.
Yeah. And that being said, I've actually shared on the screen, we we help companies close jobs that are within this space pretty quickly, but 2 that we have currently open are just flashed on the screen. So for anybody looking for positions, do contact me or Jenny. So that's Jenny@scismic.com or Danica@scismic.com, and we definitely can help you transition through that. On that note, we have hit.
Want to follow those links as well.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. All right. So on the dot, thank you so much to Bridget, Rohit, and Zander for joining us today. And thank you for all of you for kind of making the time to be with us. I hope this was useful for you. I learned a lot personally. And usually we follow up with some of key learnings, either through a blog post or through email. So any questions that anyone had in the audience that couldn't get answered, I apologize to send them to us